Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Baril Khilaika Ajma'in. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulihi wa habibihi Abil Qasim al-Mustafa Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Wa ala ahli bayti at-tayyibin at-tahirin al-ma'sumin wa la'natu ala a'daihim ajma'in min al-an ila yawm ad-din. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah wa al-arwahi allati hallat bi fina'ik. Alayka minni salamullahi abada ma baqit wa baqiya al-layl wa nahar. Assalamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa ala awlad al-Hussein wa ala ashab al-Hussein. Assalamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, continuing from where we left off yesterday, we're talking about corruption. We're talking about corruption because this is one of the statements or the affirmations by Imam Hussein alayhi salam that he was not rising up as a person of corruption. So one of the criteria or characteristics of a Husseini person is that they are not corrupt. And we defined corruption as putting things in their wrong place. That's corruption. Right? Corruption doesn't just simply mean doing sins, doing bad things. That's a part of corruption. Sin is a type of corruption. It doesn't necessarily only mean, for example, being in power and using power for your own advantage. That's also an aspect of corruption. Corruption is putting things in the wrong place. So, for example, if you are the child of your parent, well, of course you are, and you treat your parent in a disrespectful manner, that's corruption, because a parent deserves respect. So you're being corrupt. If you are not applying justice, for example, and you are not being impartial in judging people, that is corruption, because you are giving judgment against someone who most likely that judgment should be in favor of them. If you are, for example, advocating certain types of social relationships, as I had hinted before, with respect to, let's say, for example, what is current in the West right now that is encouraging, let's say, marriage between men or marriage between women, this is corruption, because marriage is supposed to be between men and women, for example. See, all of these things are corruption. And you find, like, for example, on the level of, let's say, just simply leadership of society, which on a certain level is what Imam Hussein alayhi salam is fighting against the wrong leader in the community. And you get involved in, let's say, politics. But your politics is, for example, to enrich the rich and to exploit the poor. This is not the responsibility of leadership or of government, because society, as we mentioned before, is a collection of human beings in order to safeguard the rights and to protect the poor or the weak among us. And so therefore, if you're in government and you do not do this, this is corruption. And one aspect of corruption we were talking about yesterday, or we began talking about yesterday, was in the use of language. Why? Because when we use obscene language, we are engaged in a type of corruption. Why? Because everyone that we are interacting with, whether good or bad, Muslim or non-Muslim, deserves respect, because everybody is a potential Khalifatullah fil ard, a Khalifa of God on the earth. Everybody, for example, is created in a noble fashion, and so we must show them respect. And if we do not do so in terms of our language, then this is corruption. And we find in our society today, when we think about movies and when we look at some of these, film stars, their lives, or these singers and their lives and so forth, and the kind of things that they promote, we realize that corruption is something that is spread in society. Corruption is something that is not just on a personal level. This is a personal corruption, but we talk about social corruption. This is when the society itself does not correct people who are doing wrong. And I think obscenity is, as I mentioned yesterday, something very important because it weakens the intellect. It weakens the intellect because it bypasses our critical factors. It bypasses our rational factors. And so, for example, when we use these words, we are boycotting our minds from using more appropriate words, which leads us to being able to evaluate our situation and evaluate the negative things that we come up against. And we lose our ability to be in control of them. It is something quite habit-forming, actually. I remember, when I was not a Muslim, I used to be in the military, and in the military, as maybe some people might know, in the West, people use four-letter words all the time. And of course I would get involved in that and so forth. I wasn't that kind of a guy, but just in that environment, very interesting, because your environment sometimes makes it easier for you to be good or makes it easier for you to be bad. And after I would, let's say, return home from a base, I had to very consciously censor my words because they became so easy to express these types of language, in the most inappropriate situation. And you find this type of thing happening in Western schools a lot. Young kids just swearing at their teachers, for example, swearing at each other and so forth. Sometimes it's not deliberate, it's just that they are used to that type of thing. When they're angry, they express themselves in a particular way like that. So they're angry with the teacher, and so they express themselves to the teacher in a form like that. It becomes quite habit-forming, and it is something that one has to fight against in themselves. So what happens here is that your language becomes degraded, and in the degradation of your language, you lose that capability of expressing yourself in a beautiful way. And the role of the media, for example, in this type of thing is very pernicious, very, very pernicious. One of the things that Islam encourages us to do is to speak in beautiful language. You see, Allah is beautiful and Allah loves beauty. And that beauty that Allah loves is both an outward beauty and an inward beauty. And it's especially the inward beauty that is very impressive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we have to encourage beautiful speech, especially in our prayers, in our dua, for example. One of the roles of the du'as that we have, like for example in the Sahifa, Sajadiyya, and so forth, we see the role of beautiful speech, and we learn from them beautiful speech. Many times I think we relate to du'as on a superficial basis. Now, du'as have two capacities, two elements going on here. First of all, as they say, dua is the upward movement of the Quran. The upward movement of the Quran. Dua is the ascent the mu'min, you see. And in those du'as, they teach us how to pray. In those du'as, it is very good to recite them literally, because in those du'as, there are hidden keys to opening the door of mercy and opening the door of ascent towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is very important. But the other thing that is important is that these du'as also tell us how to approach Allah in our own words, in our own efforts, in terms of speaking to Allah about what bothers us, what we need from Him. In speaking to Allah, for example, in terms of our humility, in being aware of our hiqara, you know, our subservience and our smallness with respect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You find that in many of these du'as, you know, these ma'asumin, they are many times in the beginning of their dua, they are concerned about their sins or about their sinful nature. Okay? They're concerned about this. They ask Allah for forgiveness. Now the question comes up, well, if they are ma'asum and they cannot sin, why are they asking Allah for forgiveness for their sins? What is going on here? It's a very important question. The way we answer this, and I learned this from reading there's a very good translation of the Sahifa Sajadiyya by William Chittick, and he talks about this in the preface, and I found that very, very impressive. And he says, you know, some people say that, well, you know, they didn't sin, they're not sinning, and they're just praying to Allah to teach us how to pray. And he says, if this is their purpose, then it is a bit disingenuous, meaning it's a bit deceptive. You know, it's like me praying to Allah, oh, Allah forgive me my sins, and I'm looking at you, you know, I'm saying this for you. I'm not saying this for Allah. You understand what I'm saying? Right. But he says this, basically, there are two types of sin. There are two types of sin. And it goes back to our discussion a couple of days ago about the nature of evil. Okay, that one evil is sort of the boundaries of the existence of a thing. Because a thing is not as perfect as God. The limitations of that perfection of that thing is its evil. For example, knowledge. We increase our knowledge, but we are also aware that we are ignorant of further knowledge. That ignorance is an evil. Sin is the same thing, in the sense that we have something what we call moral sin or practical sin, and we have something called ontological sin. Ontological sin. Moral sin is, I do a wrong. I know that it is wrong, or I might not know that it is wrong, but that thing is a sin in itself. Okay? For example, I steal, I lie, I murder, and so forth. This is sin. And you have to ask permission, also forgiveness for that. And this is not what the Imams are asking Allah for forgiveness for. They're not sinning outwardly. But there's a sin called ontological sin. And that ontological sin is us not being able to be good enough for God. Simple. Not being good enough for God. All right, so I want to be charitable, and I give money in charity, but the money that I have to give in charity is not enough. I cannot give any more. In a sense, that is a sin, because if I could have, I would be acting in a proper way. A good insight into this is a statement by Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, where he says, "O Allah, how can I praise you when the very breath I use to praise you, I have to praise you for?" In other words, my praise of you, my thanks to you is inadequate, is insufficient with respect to your glory. And so the limitations of that praise is a sin. The limitations of that praise go back to my own limitations in my relationship with you. That yes, I am doing good, but I'm not doing good enough. And forgive me for that. This is what they're asking Allah to pray to forgive them for. The Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that he asks Allah for forgiveness 70 times every day. 70 times every day. And so we have to follow him on this as well. You cannot ever say, well, today I didn't do any sin. You can't. Because the day you say that is an act of arrogance. And you have to ask Allah to forgive me for this arrogance. The day that you didn't sin, Imam Ali alayhi salam says, this is an Eid. This is something you should celebrate. But it's very difficult to do this because you didn't know if you didn't sin or not. Because remember, sin is not something just that you do. Sin is also something that you didn't do. Sin is a sin of omission or it is a sin of commission. So, learning from these du'as, they teach us how to speak to God. And when we speak to God, we must be very, very conscious of our distance from God. We must be very conscious of our sinful nature. So when you're praying to God and you're asking God for forgiveness, what you have to do is to be thinking in your mind, what am I asking forgiveness for? You see, we tend to approach religion and the teachings of religion in a very ritualistic way. Okay? For example, when we pray, it's a repetition of something you do every day. And the tendency of human beings is to do it just by habit. You know, you're praying, you're just saying the words, you're carrying out the actions, but you're not concentrating on the actions. You have to be able to focus on this. Similarly, when we're doing istighfar, it is not sufficient to say astaghfirullah 70 times on a tasbih and you think that, I'm finished, I'm done, I did my part. No. For every istighfar that we are saying, we must be thinking, why am I saying this? What am I asking istighfar for? Right? It's like you give something to somebody and they take it from you and they say thank you, but the thank you is not from the heart. You see? I notice here people don't do it that much. But, like back in England and Canada and so on, after you pray, you give salams to one person to the right and another person to the left. And I like to watch people when they're doing this, you see? So they turn to the right, they give salams, and they're looking at the other side already to the other person. They give salam alaikum and they're shaking hands like this. Okay? This is ritual. This is habit. No. What I do sometimes, I keep holding their hand. So they look away and why is he holding my hand? Okay, look at me in the eye. Assalamu alaikum. This is for you. You see? It's the same thing with our prayers and so forth. So we have to do that internal jihad. We have to put that concentration, that sincerity. This is what ikhlas is. To put that ikhlas in the action that we are doing. And Allah rewards us for this. Allah doesn't reward us for making salah without thinking, without thought. No, He wants you to make salah with heart, with presence, hudurul qalb. You see, with yourself in there. When we look at Surah Al-Fatiha and we see that Allah begins, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Twice. Okay? Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Twice he says, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. That is the next most powerful two names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we think about the meaning of this, that you are speaking to a God who loves you, you're speaking to a God who is infinitely kind, and you concentrate on this, this melts your heart. This makes your salah more meaningful. It makes it more real. So we have to try to avoid ritualizing our religion. Try to avoid ritualizing our religion. Try to, when you say salam to somebody, you bring yourself into that salam. You put your whole self into it. You hold their hand, you look in their eye, you smile with them, and you're showing them, I love you. I love you in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I love you because you are a mu'min. I love you because we believe in the same thing. You see? And this is what brings character to our behavior. Give salawat to the Holy Prophet Muhammad and his family. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. So we should reflect on the beauty of our supplications. We should try to make them attractive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we are interacting with our fellow brothers and sisters, we should show ikhlas to them. We should show love to them. We should show sincerity to them. And this unites our hearts. This is what salams are supposed to do. Salams are supposed to make us love each other even more. You know, there's a hadith that says, you always give your brother and sister salams after any barrier that comes between you. So I leave this room and I come back, and I see you again, I give salams. You're walking with somebody and you separate because you have to pass a wall or a column or something like that. You give them salams when they meet. Salams is something that unites the heart and makes everybody in a situation of love and kindness with each other. When we are not in control of our language and not in control of our tongues, when we reduce our language to obscenity and unkind words, and we lose this problem-solving ability because we are not able to conceptualize through our words and therefore our thinking about whatever situation that we are confronted with, this leads to frustration. When people are upset and they bring these words to describe their feelings, it cuts that ability to deal with it. And so therefore it leads to a kind of delinquency. This delinquency is based on our lack of control over ourselves in our environment. And this is what leads to fights and killings and despair and degeneration. For this reason, education is a very important tool to self-understanding and to giving us the literal and verbal tools to be able to analyze our situation and therefore to be able to support us in changing our environment. What we find in this society is that you have a kind of programming, especially focused upon youth, to destroy that ability to problem solve, to destroy that ability to think. And unfortunately, in the era of social media, you find that youth are more and more losing their ability to communicate. They have invented certain shortcuts in communicating with each other. And because of these shortcuts, you find them unable to express themselves properly. So comparing this era of youth to my time, for example, we find that a lot of youth don't like reading. They do not like reading. They don't have the ability to focus or to sit quietly and open a book and read. You find that a lot of people say with pride, I don't read much, but I do look at clips about various subjects. I do look at documentaries. And they think that this is a great thing. But if you look at a documentary and a clip, it does not encourage us to conceptual thinking, the problem-solving thinking. You might be reading a book, and when you're reading this book, what you're doing is you are imagining. You are turning things around in your mind. You can't understand something in the book, you close the book, you think, you look up in the air, you think. You say to yourself, okay, I don't know this word. Let me investigate this word. This is the beauty of reading. Allah says He taught us by the pen. But in this day and age, we are being taught by the video. And this is a very, very negative thing. Yes, it might have some of its uses, but it is destroying your ability to conceptualize. Because when you read a book, you are learning language. You see the language written on the page, and this goes into your heart. This goes into your mind. You are able to use these tools, these words, in order to be able to understand more deeply the thing that you need to understand. And so therefore we need to be able to culturize or to acculturate our kids to the beauty of reading books. You know, a lot of people come to me and say, you know, my son or my daughter in school, you know, they don't like to read. I'm trying my best to get them to read, and they don't want to read. The first question I ask them is, do you read? Do they see you reading? Because if they don't see you reading, they would not be encouraged to read. You see? You have to read in front of them, not just for them, but for yourselves. And so we, in our behavior, we are actually perpetuating this illiterate type of culture among our youth. Not only that we are, you know, limiting ourselves, but we are also, by our example, limiting our children. So you want your kids to read? You read. Turn that TV off. Turn off your computer. Open a book. When they see you reading this book, and you smile with the book, that something is funny in the book, they want to know it. When they see you close the book, and you say to your wife or to your husband, you know, this person said something interesting, or I don't agree with what they say, or what have you. They're listening to these types of things, and they're being encouraged by your action to be able to become literate. Who are the ones who run this country? Who are the ones who, when I say this country, I don't mean here, I don't know who's running this country. I'm talking about people in the West and so forth. When you look at, let's say, the elite in British society, they are trained to take charge. And they are not trained in university, you know. They're trained in high school. The elite sends their children to places like Eton and Harrow and so forth, private schools, expensive schools, as high school students. They teach them how to run society. So they went to university and they got 4 PhDs and they could take over the government like that. No, it begins there. And in these schools, they have things like, they stress reading, and they stress math, and they stress knowing about society, sociology, and so forth and so on in high school. And they also have, among other things, debating societies. You know, so, and everybody's got to participate in a debating society. Everybody's got to get up and defend a particular belief or understanding that they have. And not just an understanding that they have, sometimes they want you to take a position that you don't have. So I want you to debate on, let's say, global warming. You know nothing about global warming, but as a kid, you getting into that debate tomorrow, you'll be reading as much as you can about global warming. And you'll be reading much as you can about the pros and cons about global warming. So when you get in there, you're able to defend yourself. And it is no wonder that these men and women become leaders in the society. So we have to train our children. We have to train our children. We have to take a page out of their book and to be able to apply it in our schools, in our families, in our societies, in order to make our children eloquent, to make them convincing in society. So when they do Amri Ma'ruf wa Nahi al-Munkar, they can do it with eloquence and conviction, and they can change people. And they could be powerful in society. Give salawat to the Holy Prophet Muhammad and his family. There's a quote by Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, who says, I only like to see the youth among you occupied with one of two states, occupied with one of two states of being, learning or teaching. For if that youth does not learn or teach, then they are wasting their time. And by wasting their time, they will lose out. And by losing out, that youth will be eventually committing a sin. And by committing a sin, that youth will dwell in the fire by the one who sent Muhammad with the truth. He's swearing by this. So we have to encourage our youth in learning and teaching. Now somebody might say, what about fun? What about sports, for example? What about, youth love to play. That is included in learning and teaching. What kind of game you want to play, for example? Could you teach it? Could you learn it? I was talking some time ago about young women, for example, representing Hazrat Abbas, alayhi salam. How could they learn this? For example, you send your daughter to learn, let's say, judo or karate or kung fu or something. This is learning. And then they graduate in this, they can teach. There are a lot of games and frivolous activity that do not encourage the development of the mind. Don't encourage the development of the mind. Don't involve the development of, for example, eye-hand coordination. Things like that. You have to be very careful because a lot of this stuff is programming. It is programming your youth to be an idiot, programming your youth to be a fool so they are not critical and not able to change their environment. And they learned this from the events of the 60s. Because in the 60s, it was one of the last times, well, the second to last time, one of the last times where youth were so empowered. Why? Because when they went to university, many of them studied the humanities. They studied sociology, they studied psychology, they studied political science and so forth, so they had an opinion about society. So when America was involved in the Vietnam War, or when you had that period in contemporary American history of racial apartheid, these young black youth and young white youth, because they had the words and the tools of analysis to be able to judge, walaikum salam, to be able to judge and to evaluate their society, they were able to say, this is wrong. This is wrong. And they were able to go into the streets and to demonstrate and so forth. And this is what stopped the American government being involved in the Vietnam War and to make steps to change the internal apartheid system in America, and also, to a certain extent, address themselves to the problem of native people. What happened after the 60s? What's happening in our time? One of the things that many of these universities are doing is cutting back on the humanities, emphasizing the sciences. Nothing's wrong with studying the sciences, okay? But they're emphasizing the sciences. Why? Because the sciences basically is about applying yourself to a particular technical task. It does not concern itself with the problems in society. And they said, that's why these guys are so active. Because they're reading too much. They're reading the wrong books. We don't want them to do this. So they started cutting back on the humanities and not funding these types of things. And in the place of this, what they did was they filled the mind of the youth with entertainment. And one of the things, for example, as a black person, they made it very, very important, and they focused on us to put that entertainment thing in our minds. So you'd ask a black kid, what do you like to be when you grow up? And if she's a girl, she says, I want to be like Beyonce. Or if it's a boy, he says, I want to be like Jay-Z. You see? Why? Because this is the replacement of your critical faculty. And it's something that we have to fight against them. It's very, very difficult to shake them from this. It's not over though. I said there was a second to last time when youth rose up. The last time they rose up was about 10 years ago or so with the Occupy Wall Street movement or the 1% movement. You guys remember this? You remember this? When after the crash, when all the banks were, and insurance companies and so forth, because of their corrupt practices, it resulted in a breakdown of the economic system. A lot of youth went to the streets, and I think they tried to do what happened 20, 30 years before in the 60s. It was quite an impressive movement. It was basically international. Youth were marching in the streets of New York, to marching in the streets of Melbourne, Australia, to marching in the streets in London, to marching in the streets in Paris. This international mass movement that could have changed the society did not do so. And the reason why they didn't do that, the reason why they failed, was because of a very important thing that Noam Chomsky, a very prolific writer on political science and so forth, said. He said they lacked institutional memory. They lacked institutional memory. What did he mean by institutional memory? What did he mean by this? Well, think of the word institution first. An institution is anything that is organized on a wide scale, on an organized scale, on a big scale, for a particular social purpose. For example, the institution of the clergy, or the institution of the justice system, or any type of things like this. So for example, let's say I want to be a fireman. I join the fire services. Now in the fire services, they have a standard way of training somebody to be a fireman. That way is the way of the institution. And first of all, you get training. But after the training, and you are hired as a fireman, you are now a full-fledged fireman, you're still a novice fireman. So they pair you up, or they get you to associate with guys who have what? Experience. People who would teach you stuff that was not taught in the school. Okay? This is the memory of the institution. By being a fireman, you share in this. One of the ways that you share in the knowledge that is inherent in an institution is, for example, reading books, reading about it. And because of this, when you are confronted with a particular problem, you know how that institution would deal with it. You know, based upon your training and your experience, how to confront this particular problem. And this is why, for example, if you're a doctor, you have to, for example, have an internship program. If you're a banker, you have an internship program. What is internship? Internship is connecting you with the institutional memory of that particular profession or field that you are in. He said these youth lacked institutional memory. It meant that they didn't know what to do after you demonstrate. Where else do we go from here? And it's not just those youth, it's among ulama too. It's among us too. I remember in Qom, after 9/11, one of my friends went back to America. He was Afghan, he was an Afghani American. He went back to America. And he saw a lot of anti-Muslim Islamophobes and Islamophobic behavior against Muslims. And I was talking to him on the phone. At that time, they were beating up Muslims and they were, attacking Muslims all over the place. He called me on the phone from America. I was in Qom at the time. He said, this is what's happening. He said, I don't know what to do. I said, why don't you guys march? Go on the street, say, with placards and so forth, we're not like them. We are American. We are, law-abiding sisters of people of the society. We also condemn this and so forth and so on. He said, but if we do this, they will attack us. I said, precisely. He said, what do you mean? And I had to tell him about Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. Because when Martin Luther King went on the street to demonstrate against racism, what happened? They put fire hoses on them, they sick dogs on them, police came and beat them up and so forth. But guess what? It was recorded live on TV. It was broadcast on TV. And the very same people who says, I hate these guys and I want to get rid of them, they saw their own cruelty and savagery played out for them on the screen, and they felt very self-conscious about it. But he lacked institutional memory. And a lot of Muslims and a lot of ulama in the West have no idea of the institutional memory necessary for changing society in the West. And this again is where knowledge and learning comes in. You don't just study Islam. You study Islam by trying to apply Islam to your own environment. And when you do this, then your Islam is going to be a living Islam. Your Islam is going to be a Hussainiya Islam. Give salawat to the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Corruption has two aspects to it. Corruption has an internal aspect and is internally generated outwardly, and it has an outward aspect where a system, as I mentioned, of corruption encourages corruption in your heart. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran in the Surah Baqarah, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَإِذْ قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. And when it is said unto them, do not make mischief in the earth, they say, we are only correcting things, we are only trying to make things better. Are they not indeed the mischief makers? Are not they indeed the mufsideen? But they perceive not. So when you don't perceive the reality of things, when you don't perceive in your heart what's going on outside there, then nature abhors a vacuum. And this is where the propaganda machinery of the system fills that void. And this is why, if we were Jews in Nazi Germany, we would not be able to see why we should leave or why we should fight. If we were in Kufa and we were not aware of the propaganda of Muawiyah and the propaganda of Yazid, we would not be able to stand up and fight for Imam Hussein alayhi salam because we would be seeing him as our enemy. Look at Obama and look at, for example, him and the West and Europe attacking Gaddafi. They destroyed Gaddafi. They destroyed Libya. What happened out of that? What happened out of that is Libya became a failed state. I'm not supporting Gaddafi, right? But they're not thinking. They don't perceive. What happened is Libya became now a hotbed of terrorist activity. And you have now all these refugees coming into into Europe, and none of them are going over to America. This is the facade that they are actually doing. And so when we are able to conceptualize and be able to analyze our environment, we are able to take the right measures to be able to change things. And it doesn't mean that you have to jump up and be rash in your arguments or in your actions. No, it makes you think. What's the best strategy? I remember, for example, one time in my university, there was a strike by university workers. And we perceived that the university administration was prolonging, responding to the strike because they wanted students to be anti the workers who were striking for their rights. And some of us decided, no, this is wrong, this is unjust. We have to do something about this. But what should we do? So we said, you know what? Maybe a good idea is to occupy the president's office. Go in there and sit down and not move until things change, to pressure the university to do this. And so we thought about this. And we said, well, what if, for example, they want to kick us out of the university? We said, well, we could make this a condition for the change. You see, we thought about this. What are we going to lose? What can we gain? And so we devised a plan, and we occupied the president's office, and we made one of the conditions, not only should they come back to the table and argue fairly, but also that there would be no repercussions upon us. And so this, you see, when you want to change things, it makes you think. And you could act only on the level that you can. Nobody is saying that you have to be like Imam Khomeini or anything like that. Just act on the level that you can, and you can change your society. The role of the believer in society is to stand up for justice. It's to stand up for justice in whatever capacity you can. This is what a Hussaini thing is. You have to know what is your Karbala. What is your Karbala? Your Karbala could be on the job. Your Karbala could be in the university. Your Karbala could be in the high school. Your Karbala could be on your neighborhood. What is your Karbala? And how am I going to be Hussaini in this Karbala of mine? And if you don't do this, you're only a superficial Hussaini. So I encourage you, brothers and sisters, that we Shias should be scary. Should be scary. I don't mean scary with a raggedy beard and walking around with, your dash halfway up your calf or something like that. I don't mean that kind of scary. No. I mean that whenever somebody makes a mistake or somebody does something wrong, they're looking at you because he is going to say something about me. He's going to expose me. He's the one that is going to, or she is the one that is going to try to change things. This is how we should be. I want to end this by saying, I remember one time, way back in the 70s, when Islam was spreading in the United States. I met one non-Muslim sister, and I asked her where she was living. And she was living in a pretty rough neighborhood of New York. I said, why are you living there? She says, because they're all Muslims living there. At that time, Muslims were colonizing, in a sense, rough parts of New York City. I said, why are you living there? She says, because in there I feel more safe than if I was living in Manhattan. He said, I can leave my door unlocked and nobody could walk into my house or my apartment. Because why? Those Muslims are there in that environment that were looking out for each other. Give salawat to the Holy Prophet Muhammad and his family. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Today, I would like to speak about Zuhair. Zuhair was a notable companion of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And Zuhair was from Kufa. And he was also a follower of the Muawiyah line. And on his way back to Kufa, he coincided at the same time when Imam Hussein alayhi salam was going towards Kufa. And he hated Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam so much that he tried to avoid stopping at the same time where Imam Hussein would stop, until it came to a point where he had no choice. And while he was sitting down with his family, a messenger came and said that Imam Hussein alayhi salam wants to see you. And he didn't want to go. But his wife said, the son of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is inviting you and you don't want to go? Very interesting. The role of women in Karbala, they're like the conscience of men. Women are like this. A good woman encourages a man to stand up. And so he went over to meet Imam Hussein alayhi salam. When he came back smiling. They say his face was radiant. And he said to his wife, look, I'm going with this man and I don't want to put you into trouble. So I want to let you go and I want to stay with him. And she said to him, I'll go, but only if I'm with you in paradise. And so Zuhair joined the caravan of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And it is said that Zuhair was one of the people who stood in front of Imam Hussein alayhi salam where when the arrows were coming, and Zuhair took these arrows. They said it was about 38 arrows that killed Zuhair. And Zuhair died in the way of defending his Imam. And are we ready to do this? Are we ready, out of love of our Imam, to be able to stand up for him like this? Here's a person who hated the Ahlul Bayt, but because he confronted himself, and because he found his Imam, he was able to give his life for him. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah wa ala wahi allati halat bifina'ik. Alayka minni salamullahi abadan ma baqit wa baqiya al-layl wa nahar. Assalamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa ala awlad al-Hussein wa ala ashab al-Hussein. Salawat.